One of the main questions, and one of the hardest questions that you'll ever have to answer, it's the question that everybody asks. Of course, we're talking about the context today of searching for job search. But if you remember back to whatever your career was prior to walking into TNG, there was a different version of this question that everybody asked, and it was, why should I choose you? The version that you're facing right now is, why should I hire you? So if we think about that question a little bit more, we think about the fact that if you're in sales, your potential customers are asking, why should I choose your product? Why should I choose your company? If you're in some sort of business development, they ask the same question. If you're a leader in a company, your employees are asking, why should I continue to choose you? If we were having this conversation back in February or January, I would say that most of the employees in companies had lots of choices out there, right? Unemployment was very low back in January and February. It's increased almost fourfold in the last 4 months. But back then, a lot of employees were being called by recruiters, et cetera, and they might have been asking, why should I continue to choose you as my employer? Or if they're looking at a new position like you might be doing now, they would say, why should I choose you as my employer? And then, of course, if we spin the wheel one more time, we know that customers and clients, again, depending on the context, they're all asking, why should I choose you? Why should I choose you to continue providing this product for me? Why should I choose you to continue to serve me in this way? And now the context that you're in right now, when you meet with a hiring manager, or you talk with a potential future employer or future boss, the question they're asking is, why should I hire you? At the same time, the question you should be asking is, why should I choose you? We're having this interview. We're having this conversation. Why should I choose you to be my employer? I know that's a scary thought right now, because I know a lot of people are probably feeling the pressure of saying, I just want an offer. I just need an offer that I can accept and I can move forward. And I get that. I get that pressure. But this question needs to go both ways. They're asking, why should I hire you? You should be asking, why should I choose you to be my employer? And so what I'd like to start out with today is 3 questions. The first question is, have you ever wondered why it's so difficult to stand out from your competition, from all the other people? Unemployment numbers are almost at 40 million right now in the United States. It's dropped over the last month to something like 11.1% or something close to that, which equates to 30, 36, 38 million. Something like that. But over 10% of people in the United States are unemployed, which means that there's a lot of competition out there. Every position you look at, whether it pops up on LinkedIn or Dave or Dale or someone refers you and says, hey, here's an open position at Roche or Lilly or wherever, you know that if you're thinking about applying for that, there's 10, there's 20, there's 30 other people that are also thinking about and maybe going through the application process there. And so the question is, with all those people, with all this competition, more competition than there's ever been, why is it so hard? I think we can figure out why it's so hard. It's a numbers game on some level, but why is it so hard, and why is it so important that we're able to differentiate ourselves from those competitors, from the other people that are also trying to land that position? The second question is, why is it so hard to figure out who the real decision makers are, right? The job is posted. Maybe we've talked to a hiring manager. Maybe someone referred us. But I know, having sat in the seats that you sit in when you're at St. Luke's, I know that one of the things that you talk about is having informational interviews, doing your reconnaissance, talking to people inside the organization that you might want to join. But it can be very, very difficult to figure out who the real decision maker is. And many times that real decision maker is a hidden decision maker. It's the head of this department, or it's this manager or something like that. But the only person you're getting to talk to, especially in early rounds, if there are multiple rounds, is a hiring manager. Because the way it's set up, the real decision maker has determined, or someone in the organization has determined, well, it's not worth their time to be in this meeting. We need to have the hiring manager go through this process. We need to have the hiring manager suss this out and report back to this other person. So it becomes our job, it becomes our responsibility to make those sorts of meetings worth that hidden decision maker's time. One of the best pieces of advice that I've seen in a long time has been that when you find a job posting, it's at XYZ company in Indianapolis, and here's the job. The best thing that you can do, and I love this advice, was figure out, go to LinkedIn, figure out who previously held that position, or at least as best you can, and figure out who their boss was. And just go straight to that person. We know that there's a hiring manager there, but can we go straight to that person via LinkedIn, send them a message, send them a connection request, and start talking to them, start asking them questions, and get ahead of that game, basically. But that's the key, is finding and getting to that hidden decision maker. And of course, if we see that written out, it may be hidden decision maker with parentheses S. There may be more than one decision maker. And so how do we get to those people? How do we differentiate ourselves to those people? But even more importantly, how do we convince them that we have some sort of relevance to them that none of the other candidates have? And I'm going to talk about that a lot today. Differentiation is one thing. Standing out from the crowd is one thing, like the first slide. Relevance is everything. And I'm going to hit on that several times here today. And so the final question is, and I think it's probably a fairly easy one to answer, is, have you ever wondered why it's so painful when you lose that prospect, when you lose that prospective job that you just know you were perfect for? You read the job description, you said, this is it. This is the one that I'm meant to have. This is the one that I'm qualified for. This is just like my last position. I know 2 or 3 people in that company. This one's mine. I've got this one in the bag. Home run right here. And so you go, you have the interview. Nowadays, I suppose it's probably a Zoom call, or at least some rounds of it are probably a Zoom call or something similar. And you feel like you hit it out of the park. You had a great conversation. You had a great interview, and you're going into the weekend on a high because you know that this job is yours. But then Monday morning, you get the email that says, hey, thanks for all your time. Thanks for giving us so much to think about, but we've decided to go in a different direction. Or maybe you never hear from them again, which is pretty common as well, right? You never get a response, even after you've gone through some of this interview process. And we know that's painful. Having spent a lot of time in those chairs and being around others that spent a lot of time in those chairs, I know that there are a lot of you that have gone through that scenario over and over and over. And that's damaging, right? That the pain is lasting, that pain of rejection, especially when it's a position that you knew was just right for you. So we've got to figure out how to get past that. We've got to figure out how to get through that and make sure that we are putting our best foot forward, and not only differentiating ourselves, but making ourselves relevant. And I'm going to keep bringing that word up. And some of you are going, what in the world is this guy talking about? But making yourself relevant to these decision makers. Because if you can't stand out from the crowd, if you can't make yourself more relevant than the other candidate, than that candidate they interviewed at 9 o'clock when your meeting was at 10 o'clock, if you can't demonstrate that you're more relevant than all the other candidates, then you don't have a shot. And it's interesting that, where we are today, July 10th, I guess it is, in 2020, and how many of us thought that July 10th, 2020 would look the way it does today? How many of us thought that we were going to be having conversations like this, staring at little tiny rectangles on a screen rather than sitting around a table in a meeting room at St. Luke's United Methodist Church, or sitting in a conference room at some company in Indianapolis or beyond? It's a brand new world, right? And many people, even people that have continued to be employed through this COVID crisis, many of them are still working from home. Many of them are maybe moved to permanently remote. And having been a part of a fully remote team and another team that was partially remote, what I'll tell you is that for all of the nuances and all of the new things that we're experiencing, having interviews via Zoom and everything else, one of the most important things that anyone that's trying to build a company, anyone that's trying to hire the right people for their company, one of the most important things is not the skills that you have. It's not the qualifications that you have, but it's going to be your ability to align with the team and fit into a culture that's not like any culture that they've ever had before. The two positions that I've held that I referenced just a minute ago, the fully remote team, we had a fantastic culture. And a lot of that goes back to the leadership and the way that they build that. But we meshed very well. We gelled very well. To this day, I've never met some of my former teammates in person, but I still connect with them. I still contact them. In fact, I've just hired one recently to help me with something that I need to get done. To this day, I still feel a close bond with all of those people. Now, the flip side of that is that the team that I worked with that was partially remote is a terrible culture, in my opinion. There was not a bond. There was not a camaraderie. There was not that connection. And that showed in the work that we did and the way that we did our work and the results that we produced. And that's one of the things that, again, responsibility of the leadership to develop that culture, but that's what they've got to look at when they're looking at future team members, when they're looking at future employees, not just skills, not just experience, not just degrees, not just qualifications, all of that, but how is this person so relevant to this team that we have to have them? And how is this person going to fit in with this team in the scenario that we may never actually meet or rarely meet, or whatever that future scenario looks like? And so that relevance to that situation and to that culture and to that team is vitally important, maybe more important than it's ever been. And so, again, getting back to the original question, the original statement, that the moment of truth for you is always when someone asks, why should I choose you? Why should I hire you to fill this position? Why should I choose you to be part of this team? And what's standing in front of you, one of the realities that we have to deal with, and I think this is more relevant than it was if we had been having this conversation 3 or 4 months ago. We're fighting for relevance in an age of acceleration. And I'm going to explain what that means in just a minute. But we're fighting for relevance in a time where things are changing faster than we've ever seen them change before. When I'm working with my clients right now, or even going back to the middle of March when things started to shut down, one of the things that I encourage my clients to do is have as many conversations with your customers, with your clients, as you possibly can, because you have to stay ahead of the curve. You have to understand what's changing for them so that you can continue to serve them in the way that they need you. And the same is true for you. You have to stay ahead of the curve. When companies are hiring today, July 10th, 2020, we have to understand that their needs, we have to understand that their outlook is completely different than it was back in February. And so when I'm talking about my clients, or when I'm talking to my clients about the way that they serve their clients or their customers, the one thing that I tell them is, if you're doing the same thing in the same way and saying the same things that you did back in February, you've lost. Because that reality doesn't exist anymore. And we're not going back to that reality ever again. Everything has changed, some things in small ways and some things in big ways. But everything has changed, and it's up to us to stay ahead of that curve. If we can't stay ahead of that curve, we're in trouble. If we're trying to relate to those same companies in the same way as we did back in February, we're no longer relevant. Something has changed in that position, in the way that it works, the way that you would work in that position, et cetera. Something has changed, and so you've got to be able to change with it. And this idea of the age of acceleration, or the accelerating age, comes from Thomas Friedman. He's an author, New York Times journalist. I think he's won 3 Pulitzer Prizes now. But one of his couple of his books are The World is Flat, and I think still his most recent is Thank You for Being Late. And in Thank You for Being Late, he describes this accelerating age. And he talks about the fact that there's sort of this perfect storm. There's this perfect storm of change in technology. Those of you that are from the tech world, maybe the IT world, understand the idea of Moore's Law. It's the idea that technology doubles I think originally it was every couple of years. The speed of it, the size of it decreases, the cost of it may stay the same, et cetera. But the power and ability of technology doubles every couple of years. Well, now we're something like 25 iterations in on Moore's Law, and they've changed it from 24, I think now down to 18 months. And they used to say at the same cost, and now it's less cost. So there's this exponential change in technology every 18 months. Another factor is environmental factors, climate change, population growth. Of course, now here we're faced with a global pandemic that's changing everything and the way that we think about everything. And the third and final factor in that perfect storm of change is the availability of information. We now have at our fingertips, on our smartphones, on our tablets, on our laptops, et cetera, we have all the information ever known to man in our pocket, essentially. We've never had that sort of access before, right? And so when you're looking for a job, you can do all sorts of research on every company just about on the face of the earth. And so when you combine all of those things, the availability of information, the exponential change in technology and environmental factors, all of those things combine to accelerate change. The speed of change and the speed of the rate of change, and to me that's still a very hard concept to get my head wrapped around, but those two things are changing are accelerating at the same time. Things are changing faster, and the speed at which they're changing is accelerating. They're changing faster at a faster rate. And so what happens when we put that on a grid or on a graph is it's that hockey stick shaped curve that you can see on the screen. When we have that exponential change, it creates a curve on a graph like that. Now, as you can see, there's another line on that graph, another line that we need to have on that graph, and that's that line of our ability to adapt as human beings. Right? Things are changing faster than we can adapt to. As human beings, we're not able to continue to adapt as quickly as things are changing. And if you need an example of that, the next time you have a problem with your smartphone or your tablet or whatever it is, hand it to a kid. Hand it to a 4-year-old. And they can figure it out for you. They can fix it for you. They may not give it back to you, but they can figure it out. It's more intuitive to them than it is for you, right? I don't care if you're 20 years old, it's already passing you by, right? But the 4-year-olds, they're keeping up with it so far, right? And as you can see on the graph there, if I move my head out of the way, according to Thomas Friedman, you are here. See if I can point to it. You are here. For many of us, much of what we're encountering has already passed us by. Much of what we're dealing with right now has already made us uncomfortable. And so we have to understand that with all of these changes and the rate at things are changing, much of those changes, much of that perfect storm is not really a problem in and of itself. Pandemics, yes. Climate change, yes. Those type of things, of course, are problems, but much of these things are not problems in and of themselves. But what does that mean to us as job seekers? What does that mean to us as people that are looking for jobs, or maybe we're out selling, or maybe we're employees? What all of this means to us is that there's more noise, there's more distraction, there's more disruption than we've ever seen in the history of humankind. So when we're going out and looking for a position, when something pops up on, I'm sure you've got your alert set up on LinkedIn, when something pops up and you look at that, you look at it at 8 o'clock on Friday morning, and by the time you get back there and look at it again at 1 o'clock after lunch, 30 people have already applied for it, right? It means that the positions that we're looking for may be eliminated for some reason and not even being filled, right? It means that companies and the way that they work are being disrupted. It means that companies that on March 2nd, as things were starting to happen, we were starting to get a clue that things were changing and this global health problem was coming our way. It means that those companies, and I come from an AEC, architecture, engineering, construction background, where almost every company, especially on the A&E side, almost every company would say, there's no way we can work remotely. It's such a collaborative process. You know, we all have to be in the office and working together. On March 2nd, there were a lot of companies that were saying that. Oh, this is ridiculous. We can't work remotely. Well, guess what? By March 18th, they were figuring it out, weren't they? They had to. They were being disrupted. The way that they worked was being fundamentally changed. And many of those firms have realized, hey, guess what? We can work remotely. Now, there's still some factors at play there. I want to be able to look over your shoulder. I want to be able to watch you and make sure you're doing your work. All kinds of things like that. But the fundamental way that people, companies are doing business, the way that they're hiring, the way that they're communicating are being disrupted, they're being changed. And a lot of this goes back to the idea of the accelerating age. I think Thomas Friedman may be sitting in his study today kind of chuckling and saying, yep, that really worked out for me. That graph that I had in my book, it really worked out for me because all of this, especially the pandemic part of it, really illustrates how things have changed incredibly rapidly in a very short amount of time. And so the question is, as these things change, and again, if you were talking to a company back in March or February, and they were talking about bringing you into your office, I was talking to a young guy who I connected with several years ago when I was speaking to an MBA cohort who was theoretically going to graduate in April or May. He had landed a job, his first job out of MBA school with Salesforce, and now his start date is unknown. It's uncertain, right? With all of the changes that have happened, with all of the ways that companies have had to change, the question becomes, is your skill set, is the way that you used to work, are the things that you're presenting as your strengths, are those even relevant anymore, right? With their new reality, are the things that you do, are the experiences, the qualifications, the way that you used to work? If you're a project manager, is your experience and the way that you used to manage projects, is that relevant anymore, or has that completely changed? I do a show every day at 4 p.m. Eastern with small firm architects. And one of the biggest questions that they have is about project management tools. How do we manage projects now that no one's in the office, right? And they have all kinds of questions. How do we do this? What's the system for this? What's the system for this? And one of the things I say to them is look at the tech industry. Right? The tech industry is very similar. They design things, they have to manage projects, they run projects all the way through, and it's a very similar um, ecosystem to the world of architecture and engineering. Yet they evolve very quickly. They change very quickly. Even decades prior to this pandemic, they evolve and change and adapt things where architects and engineers, many of them, especially architects, if there are any architects in the group, I'm sorry, I'm throwing you under the bus, but that's those are my degrees as well. So I'm with you. But that's a profession that has evolved very, very slowly, if at all. And so one of the things I tell them is look outside of your profession, look outside of your industry to more progressive areas, to more progressive industries, and see how they're doing it. What are tech companies using for their project management software? You can incorporate that. There's something out there, Monday.com or something like that you can use. It blows the architect's mind. They've been using this for a decade, right? Or some of these things for a decade. There are other things out there, but if you're stuck, if you're not evolving, if you're not changing with the times, which again, change is happening very, very rapidly, you're at risk of becoming irrelevant. No matter what your skill set is, no matter how much experience you have, no matter what your qualifications are. Remember, their world is changing. You have to change with it. And the question becomes, if you've been a project manager, or if you've been a vice president, or if you've been whatever your role is, if you talk about your experiences and your qualifications like this, I've got 20 years working in these types of firms doing this type of work. Well, guess what? There are a lot of other people that are saying the exact same things. And the question becomes, if you look the same and you sound the same and you act the same as all those other people, how are you going to survive? Because at that point, when a hiring manager or the boss that you would be reporting to, if they look at you and go, man, Jeff looks the same and sounds the same and acts the same as everybody else, why would I hire him? He's just a commodity. It's just like everybody else. And so in this day and age, in this rapidly evolving time, you're going to have trouble surviving. Forget about thriving. You've got to figure out how to not only differentiate yourself, but show them that you're more relevant to them than any of the other candidates for that position. And the reality is that many of the hiring managers, and you see this with all of their computer software that they run your cover letters and resumes through and all of that, the deck is in some cases stacked against you. They're looking at that. And I think, those things, those softwares and everything else, I think they speak to exactly this comment right here. You're all pretty much the same, right? I'm running your thing through this software and it spits out clicks off the keywords that I've targeted and all of that. The reason that they're doing that is, number one, efficiency for them. And, there's that aspect of it, but it's because you all look the same. When you're applying for a position, you look and sound and act just the same as everyone else, which gives me the ability, sorry, punching the microphone. It gives me the ability to run your resume, run your cover letter through a computer program and say, that's okay. It's okay for me to do this because everybody's looks the same. Now, if yours was drastically different, it wouldn't be okay, right? It would not be okay. But that's another conversation for another day. It's another game. But the point is, we've got to do something to differentiate ourselves and set ourselves apart from everybody else. And if you've ever looked at it and said, why are these hiring managers not giving me the time of day? Why are these hiring managers not responding to me? And that I think there's a cultural problem here. Personally, it's not my job today to beat hiring managers about the head and shoulders, but I think there is a cultural problem in hiring. But if you've ever said, why are they not listening to me? Why are they not looking at my information, my qualifications, my experiences, and going, I need to talk to this person. I need to talk to Jeff, or I need to talk to Bruce, or I need to talk to Dave. The question becomes, are we actually saying anything that's worth listening to? right? And if we infuse a little bit of humor in this today, I know some of you have seen this before, so I apologize, but I'm a big fan of The Far Side, Gary Larson. If some of you will remember The Far Side, and I fully believe that Gary Larson wrote the seminal book on marketing and business development, and by extension on marketing yourself as a future employee, in just 4 panels of The Far Side. The first 2 panels are called What We Say to Dogs. Uh-oh, I've got them out of order. Sorry. What We Say to Dogs. I messed that up. So what Gary Larson in the first panel of The Far Side says, what we say to dogs is, okay, Ginger, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. You stay out of the garbage, Ginger. I'm not going to do this anymore. You stay out of the garbage or else. But what did Ginger hear? What did Ginger the dog hear? Ginger heard blah, blah, Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger, blah, blah, blah. The only thing that Ginger heard was her name. It was what was important to her. Now, before I go any further, I want to clarify the fact that I'm not saying that you should think about hiring managers as dogs. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is there's a lesson to be learned here. Ginger only heard what was important to Ginger. Ginger only heard her name. And I also understand that while you're all on a Zoom call and your speakers are broadcasting my voice, the dog may be barking in the background, but some of you aren't dog people. Some of you are cat people, so I don't want to leave you out. So the second 2 panels of the seminal book that on hiring and differentiating yourself from your competitors were called What We Say to Cats. Well, Fluffy, you've clawed the furniture for the last time. I'll not tolerate that behavior any longer. Now, those of you that are cat lovers, those of you that have cats, know that maybe you've said this before, and you also know what Fluffy the cat heard when you said that. Fluffy the cat didn't hear anything. She's too busy plotting your death. Right? So again, I'm not saying that we're going to consider hiring managers like dogs or cats, but it is important to understand that just like dogs and or cats, hiring managers and your future boss all hear only what's important to them. And this is an example out of the Harvard Business Review, and this is, of course, it's about sales. It's about differentiating your product or service, but it's a very telling survey that they did. And I think it's something that we really need to heed. We really need to take note of. And what they did with this review, again, Harvard Business Review, what they did in this survey was they went to 400 organizations and they talked to the CEOs, and they also talked to the customers or prospects for those same 400 organizations. They asked one question. And that question was, do you have a strongly differentiated product or service offering? And as you can imagine, almost all of the CEOs said, yes, of course, we're different than our competitors. And that's what you would expect, right? This is what they do all day, every day. Hopefully they know their marketplace. Hopefully they know their customers, their clients. And they think in their mind, they are different than their competitors. But the problem is when the Harvard Business Review people surveyed the customers or clients or prospects from those same 400 organizations, asking the same question, do they have a strongly differentiated product or service offering? Only 10% of those prospects, only 10% of those customers, clients said, yes, they're different than their competitors. Now, again, this is sales oriented in this particular example, but it applies to you in understanding that their perception, the prospects, the customers, the client's perception is the reality that's important. Their perception has to become your reality. 80% of those CEOs are in trouble in this example, right? 80% think, yes, we're strongly differentiated, but their customers or clients or prospects are going, you're just like firm ABC. You're just like firm XYZ. So why would I value you anymore? Why would I pay any more for your product? Why should I choose you? All right. And the same is the case with the hiring manager. If a hiring manager looks out and says, hey, I've got this stack of resumes, I'm going to run them through this computer program. Number one, because that's our policy and our procedure. That's our process. But number two, because I don't have the time to flip through all these things and they all look the same to me. Right? If the hiring manager is going, I have a stack of resumes that's this high, and almost all of them look the same. Only 10% of them look any different than any of the rest, then we've got a problem. If you're not one of that 10%, you've got a real problem. And so that gets us to the point that, again, back to the idea of scanning resumes and everything else, there was a day and a time where we used to meet with someone. We used to deal with a human being where someone would read a cover letter, where someone would review a resume, and a singular person might have made a hiring decision, or it was easier at least to get to the real decision makers. I would say that for the vast majority of my career, the 20 whatever years that I worked in firms, I would say that the vast majority of my career, a human being actually read my resume. A human being actually met with me, actually took my phone call. It's different today, right? It's different today, not only in the fact that things are being scanned, but decision-making teams have gotten larger. The stakeholders, the number of stakeholders that we deal with has gotten larger. The hiring manager is doing more of the legwork, and the actual people that you would work for and work with, in most cases, that group has gotten larger, but they're less involved in the early decision-making process. But when we get to that level, if we've passed through all the different layers of meetings and interviews and tests and all of those things, the number of people that we're meeting with and the number of people that we have to convince is getting larger. And what happens from a psychological standpoint, what happens is, from a neuroscience standpoint, is that every single one of those people sitting at the table, I don't know who all those people are in your context. It might be HR, it might be legal, it might be marketing, it might be sales, whoever all those people are. Every single one of those people is sitting at the table as a stakeholder asking, what's in it for me? What does this candidate bring to the table that's important to me? And you may be sitting at across the table from them going, why in the world is that person sitting there? What in the world does that person have to do with the job that I'm trying to land right now? On a day-to-day basis, would I ever encounter that particular person? And the answer may be no, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because someone has decided that all these people need to be there. Every one of those people is saying, what's in it for me? What does this person have to do with me? And they've got a stake in the decision-making process. And we know, any of you that are married or have a significant other, all of you know that the minute a second person is added to the decision-making process, the harder it is to make a decision. When my wife comes home, well, she doesn't come home anymore. She doesn't leave. The reason I'm sitting in my basement now is because she is now working from home and has somehow wrangled my office away from me. So the minute she walks out of my office and says, what do you want for dinner? And I say, I don't know. I don't care. What do you want? All bets are off, right? It's spiraling downhill into the probability that we're probably going to have frozen pizza tonight, right? The minute that you add a second person to the decision-making process, the less likely it is, or the harder it is to get to a decision. And you can see on this chart, and I'll move my head in a minute, but you can see on this chart that if there's only one person involved in the decision-making process, there's about an 81% chance that someone is going to be able to make a decision, yes or no, right? But again, my wife came out of my office and said, what do you want for dinner? I said, I don't know. And suddenly there's only a 55% chance that we're going to be able to make a decision, and the default is going to be frozen pizza or leftovers or whatever's in the refrigerator, right? As we add more people to that mix, there is a slight uptick on that curve. But as we get over here, we get to 5 people, we get to 6 people, and it starts falling off the cliff, right? And to me, the most important, the most interesting number is this one over here. When we get to that size of decision-making team, about 6 people, which is becoming, is getting close to the average size of decision-making teams now since 2007, 2008, since the last recession. Those decision-making teams are getting larger because organizations are getting more conservative in their decision-making. When we get to that size team, this 60% number is really important. That 60% number represents the fact that it's 60% likely that a decision will never be made. So when we look at a job that's been posted forever and ever and ever, or we look at a job that's been taken down, and we try to figure out who they hired for that position, it's very likely that no one was ever hired, or that they just decided to promote from within because they couldn't make a decision, right? When those decision-making teams get larger, it's harder to make a decision, and it's more and more likely that they won't make a decision, especially one that involves going outside of the organization. So the question becomes, what can you do, right? You're sitting there in your kitchen, in your living room, wherever you are, maybe in your own office. It's going, okay, that's a whole lot of problems. You've told me a lot of things that I already know, maybe the reasons behind these things that I already know, but what can I do about that? So the first thing that we need to do, the first thing that we need to understand is that the real decision maker, the real thing that we need to do is understand the human brain. The human brain is the real decision maker. We have to understand that the human brain that I have right here, I promise it's not mine. The human brain is an incredibly powerful organ. It's not that big. It's only about 3 pounds. It's only about 2% of your body weight, but it's one of the most powerful organs in your body. It also consumes more energy just to keep it awake than any other organ in your body, except for your stomach when you're digesting. So your stomach, right after breakfast, right after lunch, right after dinner, whenever your stomach is working hard to digest that frozen pizza, because I said, I don't know, or I don't care, your brain is using more energy than any other organ in your body almost all the time. Your brain, rule number 1, is saying, I have to stay alive. I have to keep you alive. If you die, it's over, right? And the next time you get on an airplane, which I have no idea when that's going to be. Up until this year, I was on about 50 airplanes a year. This year, I don't know if I'll be on an airplane. But the next time you get on an airplane, I'm assuming that part of the safety instructions will still be, in the unlikely event a mask will drop from the ceiling, put your mask on before you try to help anyone else, right? If you die trying to help someone else, you're no good to anyone else. If you pass out due to lack of oxygen, you are no good to anyone else. So put your mask on first and then try to help someone else. Put your mask on and then decide which one of your kids you love more, okay? Your brain is going through the same calculation. I've got to stay alive, otherwise it's all over. If I don't stay alive, I'm no good to anyone else. I'm no good to myself anymore. So what your brain does all day, every day, even while you're asleep, is it's responding to stimuli, right? It's responding to stimuli, a sound, a smell, a taste, something like that. And the first thing that happens is it goes through a filter that says, is this a threat to me? What's in it for me? Is this going to help me stay alive? Is this going to hurt my chances of staying alive? And that's how it starts processing. So it's either going to move towards the stimuli, if I think it's something that's going to help me survive, something that's going to help me thrive, or it's going to move away from a stimuli if I think it's a threat to me. And that's the process that your brain's going through on its most basic levels. That's where the processing starts all the time. Goes through that lens. What's in it for me? Is this a threat? Is this something that's going to help me? And it goes on working from there. And again, small organ, powerful organ, uses the majority of your energy. The majority of the calories that you consume are being used by your brain. So a question you might have, if you're like me and you'd like to extend this out further and further and further, is thinking hard a good diet plan? I'll just let you think about that for a while. Could I think myself to death? Right? Those are the things that I think about. So when we think about our brain and the way that our brain processes, the bottom one there, I think actually should be at the top. Your brain is extremely self-centered. Your brain, again, everything is processing everything through a lens that says, what's in it for me? Is this a threat to me? Is this going to help me? There is a distinct process that it goes through. I just described it. Every single stimuli goes through that. Is this a threat? Is this not? Is this going to help me thrive, survive, etc.? And it thinks very quickly. The fight or flight syndrome. You learned this back probably in grade school or something like that. If a saber-toothed tiger walks through the door, wherever you are right now, if a saber-toothed tiger walks through the door, what do I need to do? Right? If we think long and hard about that, we're dead. That thing's going to eat me. Now, of course, it's very unlikely that a saber-toothed tiger is going to walk through your door today. But our brains are also reserving a lot of energy for the what if. What if a tiger does? What if my house catches on fire? What if the phone rings? What if? So your brain is always reserving energy for that what if, which means that though we think very quickly and we make decisions very, very quickly, not always good decisions, we make them very quickly, it also means that our brain on some level is lazy. We're trying not to use our brain as much as possible, especially the higher functions of our brains. So our brain becomes self-centered, we become lazy, we think very quickly, we make very quick decisions, not always good decisions, and there's a very distinct process that our brain uses to process everything that it encounters. And what that does is it sets up, number one, it sets up this a scenario that we need to understand in terms of how we process that information, and it also sets up some real disconnects. So if we look at the human brain and we take it apart, this is a section that I call mind blown. You take it apart and you have different areas of the brain, and I'll show you this because it's just a little bit startling, but oh my gosh, this guy's actually sitting there with a brain. What in the world is he doing in his basement? But it sets up the fact that we have a neocortex, this upper part of our brain, and then all of this part down here is what we call the limbic part of the brain. And so on the screen right now, the bluish color is that neocortex color. The greenish color is the limbic part of your brain. That neocortex part is where all of the high-level thinking is done. Reading, writing, arithmetic, understanding what an architect is, understanding what your experiences and qualifications are. All of that high-level thinking is done in that blue part of the brain, the neocortex part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that's most like a computer. It compares, it contrasts, it's looking at zeros and ones, essentially. That part of the brain, of that 20% of your calories that it's using up, of the 20% of your energy that your brain is using, an inordinate amount of that energy is used up by the neocortex, which is why we try not to use it as much as we can. We try to avoid using the neocortex because a saber-toothed tiger may walk into your room, right? When we think about what the neocortex does, it's the contemplator. It's the part, again, the logical part, the reading, the writing, the arithmetic. There can be zero loyalty in the neocortex. It's all about logic. The neocortex doesn't understand loyalty. It doesn't understand being friends. It doesn't understand being colleagues. It doesn't understand any of that. But if we go down to the limbic part of the brain, the green part on your screen, the middle and the what some people call the lizard or the reptile brain. That's where all of our emotions are. That's where loyalty resides. It can't read, it can't write. It's why a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's the part of the brain where your decisions are actually made. If you've ever heard someone say we make buying decisions made based on emotion, that's where that comes from. We make our decisions based on emotion, and then we spend the rest of the time justifying or rationalizing those decisions in the neocortex part of the brain. That's why this is how we're able to make decisions very, very quickly. We make them based on emotion down there in that limbic part of the brain. That middle part of the brain, which, again, if I can point to it, this is really hard to do mirrored. This middle part of your brain is the part of the brain that loves a great story. So if someone were to scan your brain while you're reading a book or watching a great movie, that middle part of your brain, maybe easier for me to illustrate here, this part of your brain would light up like it's on fire, right? When someone tells you a story or when you read a book or watch a movie or something like that, that's the part of the brain that's just, when I talk about storytelling or brain storytelling, and I say that our brains are actually designed to engage with and latch on to stories, it's because that middle part of the brain, that's exactly what it's there for, is to hear that, to understand that, to process that, to latch on to those things. And so that's part of that limbic part of the brain. And those disconnects that I was talking about come directly from those separate processes in the brain. Again, the neocortex, the high-level thinking. Whenever we present our experiences and our qualifications, it has to be processed in the neocortex if they're willing to open up that part of the brain, if they're willing to give you the energy to understand those things. When we talk about those things, we're asking for confusion and commoditization. When you walk in and say, listen, I've got 20 years combined experience doing this, whatever this task is, in this type of position, whatever that is, we're asking to be commoditized. What if the next person comes in and says, I've got 21 years of experience doing this? Do you automatically lose because they've got 21 and you've only got 20? Are we even comparing apples to apples, right? Anytime that we reduce, and I do mean to use the word reduce, when we reduce our experiences and qualifications down to quantifiable things that can be processed in the neocortex, 20 years versus 21 years, 2 degrees versus 3 degrees, an MBA versus a PhD, whatever. Anytime we reduce our experiences and our qualifications down to things that can be easily compared in the neocortex, we're begging to be commoditized. We're begging for the human resources manager, the hiring manager, to say, I don't see a lot of difference between this candidate and that candidate. But if we can somehow present ourselves and our experiences, our qualifications in a way that they can latch onto, in a way that speaks to them emotionally, down here in where all the feelings, where all the decisions are made in the limbic part of the brain, we're memorable. We feel like the right fit. We feel like the person that can do the job the best. When we can explain ourselves, our experiences, our qualifications in a way that makes an emotional connection, if we can tell a story about our experiences and our qualifications that their brain can connect with on an emotional level, we're the one that stands out. We're the one that's relevant. 20 versus 21 is not relevant. Those are just numbers that we're going to compare and contrast in the neocortex part of our brain. So what can we do to appeal to their limbic part of the brain, the lizard part of their brain? When someone presents or when someone posts a position on LinkedIn or somewhere else, Indeed or somewhere, that job posting is filled with, we wish we had this, we want this, we think we need this, right? All of that comes from the conscious part of the brain, and you can completely understand that. Some committee sat down and put together a list of features and benefits that they think they need for that position. We wish we had this, we want this, we think we need this. Comes directly out of high-level thinking in the neocortex. What's often, most of the time, almost never presented to you either in the job post or in the conversation, unless you're asking great questions, is what are the pains, threats, and fears that are driving those wishes, wants, and needs? There is always a pain, a threat, a fear, combination of those that are driving the wishes, wants, and needs. What are those things? As human beings, we're not generally trained to share those things. Right? When someone asks you a question, you're not generally trained to do anything but give a fairly superfluous answer. So it becomes our job to dig down, go, okay, well, why is it that you wish you had that? Why is it that you think you want that or you think you need that? The conscious and the subconscious, the conscious part is the neocortex part. The subconscious part is the limbic part of the brain. If we can appeal to their limbic part of the brain, we have a much better chance of success. We have a much better chance of connecting with them on an emotional level where they're going to make the decision whether they know it or not. So it's our job to figure out what are the pains, threats, and fears that are actually driving the things that they put into that job description, into that job posting. What are the pains, threats, and fears that make them think that they need this, or make them want this, or make them wish that they had that? And it's really, really important for us to understand as an employee, as a potential employee, that the real value that we bring to an organization is the ability to eliminate their pain, right? They said they wish they had this. They said they want this. They said they think they need this, but why? Why is it that they think those things? What are the pains, threats, and fears that are driving those things? If we can explain, if we can tell a story of a value that we bring that's beyond those wishes, wants, and needs, if we can explain a value that's greater than ourselves, that's greater than checking the boxes on their form, that's greater than the experiences and the qualifications, if we can explain how we eliminate the pain, that's value. They see value. If you can, going back to that advice that I heard, figure out who the boss was, figure out who held that position previously, and figure out who their boss was. If you can have that conversation, if you can find that person, connect with that person, and have that conversation and find out, what are you really looking for? What's really at stake here? If you can speak to the elimination of that pain or that threat or that fear, that's the value that they're looking for. That's a value that you're going to present that no one else is going to present. That's our job. That's what we have to do. We have to figure out what those real pains. Why are you actually trying to hire somebody for this position? What's at stake here? Right? It's not just filling a position. What does it mean to you if you have a great person in that position? What does it mean to you if that position is never filled? What does it mean to you if you fill that position with the wrong person? That's not the right fit, that's not part of the culture, et cetera, et cetera. Your ability to eliminate their pain is where they see value. So how do we put all of this together? I've been rambling on for a long time now. So how do we put all of this together? The first thing we have to do is we have to understand how to win the brain, and the fact that we have to win the brain. In order to do that, we have to understand that it's not about you. Yes, you want the job. Yes, they're looking for somebody like you, but it's not about you. It's about them. It's about the pains that they're experiencing right now. It's about the reason that they desperately need to hire somebody for this position. It's about what's at stake for your future boss, right? If your future boss, if his or her performance review depends on the person in your position, in this position that you're trying to fill, meeting certain metrics and making them look good in their performance review, it's about their performance review. It's not about those metrics. It's not about you. It's about them. We have to make it all about them. We have to have a relentless focus and relentless pursuit of what's important to them. And that might be a mind bender for you. right? You've been writing your resume, your cover letter. It's been all about you. Yeah, I might be saying you need to rewrite all of those things. I might be saying that when you write, your experience, the story of the last job that you held, you might need to rewrite that story and make it about them. You might need to write that story and make it about their pains, eliminating their pains, threats, and fears. And that gets me to a concept that I've been studying for a few years now that I call ego versus empathy. Straight out of neuroscience, straight out of the idea that our brains are fundamentally self-centered. What's in it for me? What's going to help me survive? What's going to help me thrive? Is this a threat to me? When we start out a conversation, and that conversation can be your cover letter. It can be a literal conversation between me and you. It could be a conversation in an interview situation with a panel of people. When we start out that conversation from a point of ego, and I don't mean egotistical, and I don't mean egomaniacal, but I mean, these are my experiences. These are my qualifications. These are the things that I think are important. These are the things that I know because of my degrees, my experiences to be important. When we start out from a point of ego, we start out in direct conflict with their brain. Remember, they're filtering everything through what's in it for me. If we go back a handful of slides to that panel of people, there's 5 of them, there's 6 of them, and you say, well, based on my experience, I've got these degrees, I've done this for 20 years, and you're saying that to 5 or 6 different human beings, at least one of them, probably 4 of them are going, what's that got to do with me? Because every single one of them has different experiences. Every single one of them has different goals. And every single one of them is going, what's in it for me? Right? So if we start out from a point of ego, we start out in direct conflict with their brain. But if we start out from a point of empathy, listen, I understand. I was having this conversation and you were telling me this, and I know that what's really at stake here, based on what you said, is this. If we start out from a point of empathy, we start out in direct alignment with their brain. Oh my gosh, he was just talking. This is exactly what we were just talking about in our last meeting. It's like this guy's bugged our room or something. That might be a little bit creepy, but he's the only person that's talked about what really matters to us and what's really at stake because of this role in our company. If we start out from a point of empathy, we start out in direct alignment with their brain. And some of you that know me know that I love stand-up comics. I love comedy. I'm not trying to be a comic. I have no aspirations to get on stage and try to make people laugh. But I love comics, number one, because they're funny, but number two, because they're some of the best communicators in the world. If you think about what they do, if Jerry Seinfeld were to be on stage tonight in Indianapolis, he's going to step out on stage for a 1-hour set. For him, it's probably going to be a stool and a microphone and a glass of water sitting in the stool. And he's going to try to make thousands of people laugh just through the stories he tells, just through the words that he uses. And if you hear somebody like Seinfeld talk about their craft, the craft of comedy, the thing that almost every single one of them will tell you is that they have between 15 and 30 seconds to hook the audience. Basically, they have 15 to 30 seconds for that first bit to land. Otherwise, it's going to be a really long night. But if they can land that first bit, then they earn the next 30 to 45 seconds. And if that one lands, then they earn the next 30 to 45 seconds. And if that one lands, they earn the next 45 to a minute and a half, whatever it is. It's a process of continually earning the next bit, the next part of the conversation in your context. So, given that information, when you're talking to someone, it's a phone interview, it's a Zoom interview, it's an interview with a panel of people, you need to understand that your job is to land that first bit. Your job is to align with them right out of the gate so that they might listen to the next thing that you have to say. You can't risk the fact that you may shut down their brain with the first thing you say. talking about yourself, talking about your experiences, talking about your qualifications. That may shut down their brain. They may say, Jeff sounds just like that last guy we interviewed. Sounds just like him. 20 years, 21 years, 2 degrees. Yeah, whatever. Right? It's right after lunch. My stomach is digesting my lunch. All of my energy has gone down to my stomach. I'm really too tired to try to figure out if Jeff's any different than that last person. Right? That's what's at risk. That is literally what's at risk when we start out in that way, when we're not focused completely on aligning with their brain. Many of you have probably seen the Simon Sinek's TED Talk. He talks about his book, Start With Why. If you haven't seen that TED Talk, I'd suggest you watch it before the end of the weekend. It's about 17 minutes or so. It's really worth 17 minutes to watch it. I forget what the actual title of it, of the TED Talk is. It might actually be How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action. That would make some sense, wouldn't it? But it's about his book, Start With Why. In his book, which most of the people, at one time, that was the most watched TED Talk. It's been passed up by now, but for the millions and millions of people that watch that TED Talk, I know that very few of those millions and millions actually read the book, Start With Why. It's also worth your time to read that book. But the main concept that he presents is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. If we translate that to your situation, people don't hire you for what you do, they hire you for why you do it. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think there are some fundamental flaws there, but I think there's a lot of truth to that particular statement, both on the hiring side and the buying side. But I think what's really important about these concepts is when you watch the TED Talk, depending on the version, Simon Sinek is probably going to have a flip chart where he draws three concentric circles. He calls that his golden circle. And he says, when he talks about his golden circle, that everybody knows what they do. I am an architect. I am an engineer. I am a project manager. I am whatever. He says, most people know how they do it. I have this process. I use this software. I do whatever. This is how I do my job. This is how we work as an organization. He says, but very few people know, and even fewer talk about why they do what they do, their personal mission, their purpose, whatever it is. This is why I do what I do. This is why I get out of bed every day. When someone asks me why I do what I do, I tell them that my personal mission is to change the way that professional services firms do business. That's why I do what I do. Now, if that's something that's interesting to you, if you're a professional services, if you lead a professional services firm and you go, yeah, we're really stuck in the 50s. We're really doing business the same way we did in 2010 and 2000 and 1990 and 80 and 70, 60 and all the way back. We might have a great conversation, right? We might align around the idea of needing to change the way professional services firms do business. That's great. The really interesting thing to me about Simon Sinek's golden circle is that when he says everybody knows what they do, most people know how they do it, and a few people know why they do it, and the fact that people buy based on what you do, not on what buy based on why you do it, not on what you do, that aligns directly with the way our brains process information. So again, if we look at the human brain in cross-section, right? This limbic part of the brain is actually required, or I'm sorry, the neocortex part of the brain is actually required to understand what you do. That neocortex is actually required to understand what an architect is, what a project manager is, what a VP of sales is. We're trying really, really hard not to use that part of the brain. It takes too much energy, right? But that middle part of the brain, that part that loves a great story, when we talk about how we do what we do, that's a story. Well, this is how I do it. I use this software, I do this, I do that, I have this process, I have these systems in place. We're telling a story of how we do what we do. But when we talk about why we do what we do, well, my personal mission is to change the way. That aligns directly with the limbic part of our brain. It takes the limbic part of the brain to understand that. That's why we latch on to why we do what we do. So Simon Sinek's golden circle aligns directly with the way that the human brain processes information. I think that's the real genius of his start with why. How do we put these things into real world examples? Most of you probably know what that thing is on the left side of the screen. Here's mine. It's hard to see, it's washed out. You probably know that that is the first Apple iPod. The question becomes, was the Apple iPod the first multi-gigabyte MP3 player on the market? No, it wasn't the first multi-gigabyte MP3 player on the market. Many of you, probably most of you, don't know what that thing is in the middle of the screen. It's Creative's Nomad Jukebox, which was in fact the first multi-gigabyte MP3 player on the market. If you look at these two devices side by side right here, functionally these things are basically the same tool, the same instrument, the same product. There are some obvious differences between the two in terms of design, etc. The fact that most of you know what the iPod is but don't know what the jukebox is telling as well, right? The jukebox came out 18 months before the iPod came out. So when we talk about being the first to market, the importance of being first to market, well, here's a story that dispels that myth, right? The jukebox came out 18 months before the iPod, and most of you have never seen it, heard it, and most certainly didn't buy it, right? How was the Nomad Jukebox marketed? Since probably none of you ever bought it, none of you know, right? When Creative released the Nomad Jukebox, this is what they said. This was in their original marketing statement: a unique professional lifestyle design offering MP3 support with reprogrammable firmware to support future digital audio formats, software extensions, and standards. It offers consumer digital audio in style, anytime and anywhere. Remember, this was bleeding edge technology. I stumbled over half of those words. I know what every single one of those words is. I recognize them as being a word in the English language, but still to this date, I'm not actually sure how all of these things fit together into a cohesive idea. This was bleeding edge technology, so the majority of people in the world look at this and went, what the heck does that mean? We've never seen anything like this before. I don't have any idea what reprogrammable firmware is, right? Future digital audio formats. I was listening to a CD last week, and now you're talking about future digital audio formats. What in the world does that mean, right? What does that have to do with me? This might be one of the reasons that no one ever bought this device. If you think about what was popular right before this, I don't have it here close to me, but what I did with my very first big boy paycheck and my very first big boy job out of college, the very first firm I worked for in Chicago was I bought a Discman. I spent $200 on a CD player that I could plug headphones into and listen to while I rode the train in Chicago. This device looks a whole lot like a Discman, but there's no disc in there, right? But I have no idea what this statement says. I don't have any idea what it means. And that was the sentiment, I think, of most people in the marketplace. Again, this thing came out 18 months ahead of the iPod. How did Apple market the iPod? Does anybody remember that? Raise your hand if you do. You can hit the reactions button and give a thumbs up. So Michelle does. I see hers. A couple people do, right? 1,000 songs in your pocket. I get that. I was walking around with a Discman, which also means I was walking around with what? A binder full of CDs. So I've got a Discman. I've got a book full of CDs. I'll be honest with you, that and my lunch were the only things in my briefcase, right? I had a briefcase to carry all my music around. And Apple comes out and says, you can stuff 1,000 songs in your pocket. Holy cow. With those 10 CDs that I had in my little binder thing, what I have, 60 songs, something like that. It was heavy, it's bulky. I had a briefcase just for that in my sandwich. Apple tells me now I can put 1,000 songs, every Johnny Cash song, every version of every Johnny Cash song ever recorded in my pocket at the same time in this device. Here it is right here. That's my iPod. And what's the difference? Not only can we understand it, not only did people buy it, but this opened the door to this, right? This technology drew a direct line to this. This is the iPhone. The Samsung, it doesn't matter what you use. It's all that device that you see on the screen right there led the way for the smartphone, to the tablet, to everything else. And they boil it down to 1,000 songs in their pocket. So what does this have to do with finding a job, right? Well, I'm pretty certain that this did not come from any of your LinkedIn profiles, but this did come from a LinkedIn profile from someone very similar to you. I'm going to read it to you real quickly because I know my head's in the way of some of it. It says, I am an experienced, hands-on communications and social media strategist, skilled in writing, editing, media relations, project management, strategic planning, mentoring, and the effective integration of traditional and social media communication strategies. My career achievements span more than 25 years of internal and external communications and marketing experience in diverse and demanding environments. Even if you're a marketer, it probably takes you a minute to actually figure out what all that means. What that means is, what they're saying is, I've done it all. Over the course of 25 years, I've done it all. I do everything. I have experience in everything. And I really am asking you to turn on your neocortex and burn a whole lot of calories to try to figure out what in the world I'm talking about, because I am so experienced and so qualified in anything and everything you can even imagine someone in your marketing or communications department needing to do. I've got it all. And it sounds a whole lot like Creative's statement for the Nomad Jukebox, right? One question is, does a hiring manager even give you the energy to try to understand what that says? Now, this is completely oversimplified and it's completely off the cuff, but couldn't you just say, I do brand building communications? Right? That's something I can understand. And, I've got it's sort of in my world, so I get it. But can't we try to boil down all of those things into a statement like Apple did for the iPod that makes an emotional and understandable connection with a hiring manager or someone that might consider me for that next position, right? Again, when Seinfeld walks out on stage, he cannot say this. He lost the audience, right? It's going to be a really long night. When Seinfeld walks out on stage and says this, the audience goes, oh, that's interesting. It may not be funny, but it's interesting. I'm listening for what the next part of the bit is, right? And that's really the key that we have to understand. We have to understand that the value that we provide, again, back several slides back, the value that they see in us is in our ability to eliminate their pains, threats, and fears. So what is the actual quantifiable value of an emotional connection? Well, studies have said that if you're able to make an emotional connection with the person making the decision, they will assign as much as a 200% higher value to what you're selling them, whatever it is that you're talking about, than if you don't make an emotional connection with them. So what can you do? The first thing that you can do is start having better conversations now. The first thing that you can do is look at that job position, find out who held it before, and find out who their boss was, and have conversations with those types of people. First thing that you can do is start having those informational meetings. You can start doing your reconnaissance. You can start talking to people and figure out what really matters to them. I know the job description says this, but what's driving that? What's really at stake? What really matters? We have to start having better conversations now, because once you get in the room, again, phone interview, Zoom interview, interview with one person, interview with a panel of people, I think you have really about 3 minutes. The first 3 minutes of that conversation are going to determine whether or not you win or you lose, whether or not you're hired or you're not hired. You cannot afford to walk out on stage like Seinfeld and bomb in the first 3 minutes. Which means that you cannot afford to walk out on stage like Seinfeld and start talking about yourself. You have to talk about them. You have to talk about what's important to them. You have to connect on an empathy level with what matters most to them, so that you can start out in alignment with their brain. If you start out talking about who you are, what you do, what your experiences are, what your qualifications are, you are likely to lose them, lose their attention, and lose that first 3 minutes. One of the things when I'm training people, training teams, working with teams for shortlist interviews, right? They've responded to an RFP, they've made the shortlist, now we're going in for the interview. Almost every firm wants to walk in and say, thank you for letting us be, giving us this time for this interview today. We're firm ABC. We're in Indianapolis. Our qualifications are XYZ. And I say, why would you do that? Why in the world would you do that? Because what happened right before you walked in the room? Someone opened the door, stuck their head out into the hall, and said, firm ABC, we're ready for you now. You just wasted your first 3 minutes on information that they already know. Don't do that. Land with the first bit in the first 15 to 30 seconds and earn the next bit in the next 30 to 45 seconds. It's got to be about them. You've got to align with them right away. It can't be about you. And so as an example of how this works, again, just like that firm that walks in and says, hey, we're ABC, et cetera. If you walk into a job interview or you sit down for a Zoom interview with a hiring manager and you say, well, thanks for giving me the time today to have this Zoom meeting. My name is Jeff. I've been a project manager for the last 10 years. I've been working in Fortune 500 firms for 25 years. I have more experience than anyone else in these types of projects. In fact, if it's all right with you, I'd like to tell you the story of a project that I managed recently that I think is a lot like what you're talking about in this job description that you posted on LinkedIn. And then you tell them the story. And then you close out by saying, again, thanks for giving me the time to talk about my experiences and my qualifications. I know that it's important that you find a qualified project manager that has experience with these types of projects, because there's a lot at risk. You're having to cut back because of lack of income over the last 3 or 4 months. You're having to be more efficient, and you're having to be more flexible because everybody is working remotely now. And I know that you have to find a way to keep moving forward profitably and efficiently if you're going to survive. Now that might sound like the way that you would present yourself in an interview if someone asked you to explain who you are and what you do and why you're right for this position. But what I just did was I started out with myself, what's about me. It's all about me, right? Number one, that requires the neocortex. That requires the high-level thinking to understand who I am. I'm a project manager, these experiences, those qualifications. What if it is after lunch? What if they just ate a big fat sandwich full of carbohydrates that they're trying to digest right now, and their stomach is taking all the energy away from their brain? They're going into that sugar comatose, and they're going, this guy sounds just like the last guy, right? What if I didn't land that bit in the first 15 seconds? I'm asking them to do that. I'm asking them to burn lots and lots of calories to understand what I'm talking about. The good thing is, after that, I went to a story, told the story of this project that's like that thing that was in your job description. So maybe I win them back at that point, but do I want to take that risk? And then at the end, I closed out with the things that I think are really important to them, but I waited to the very end. I waited to the very end to try to align with them on what I think is important to them. So what if I did it like this? What if I just flipped that upside down and said, hey, thanks for allowing me this time on the Zoom meeting. I know that you've got to get efficient because revenues are down over the last 3 or 4 months. I know that it's a new world. Everybody's working remotely, and your project managers have to be really good at managing teams and managing themselves in a remote environment. And I know that there's a lot at stake. I know that things are unknown going forward. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know what a resurgence of the COVID virus might do to business and to customers across the world. I know those things are important. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to tell you a story about a project that I managed recently and how I think that might apply to this remote environment that we're talking about. You tell them a story. And then at the end of that story, you say, well, thanks again for your time. Again, I've got 25 years experience in these types of companies doing this type of work and managing these types of projects. I'm Jeff. And I think I'm the guy, right? I think I'm the guy for this position. The only thing I did there was I flipped that upside down. Same information, same facts, same stories, same everything. But I started out talking about what I think is probably most important to them. Now, I have to do my reconnaissance. I have to have the conversations. I have to understand what's important to them to develop that empathy to try to align with them right out of the gate. If I do that, I'm Seinfeld. I'm 15 seconds to hook them in that first bit. If I do that, I might earn the opportunity for them to listen to my story. If I hook them with that story, they may be engaged enough, even though it is right after lunch, to go, wow, this is really interesting. This guy is different. This guy's really talking about the things that matter to us. I want to know more about his experiences and qualifications, which they already know. They've got your resume. They've looked at your LinkedIn. They've been stalking you for a week. But I might earn the opportunity to have them pay attention all the way through the story, all the way through my pitch, essentially. And that's what we've got to do. That's what's at stake. Again, we can't start from a point of ego. That's the best way to shut them down. After breakfast, after lunch, middle of the day, the best way to shut someone else's brain off is to talk about yourself. The last networking event that you went to, when someone cornered you by the bar and started talking all about themselves, what happened? Your brain shut down, you stopped listening, and your brain said, how do I get out of this conversation as quickly as possible? It's neuroscience. That's what happens. Don't start by talking about what you think is important. Don't start by talking about yourself. They're asking, why should I choose you? And they really mean, why should I choose you to take care of my pain? They're not saying it. They're not going to say that. It's up to you to figure out what that pain is. It's up to you to figure out what's really at stake. But that's what they're asking. How are you going to eliminate this pain? Because that's where I see value. It's the hardest question to answer, right? When back the last time you sat in the room at St. Luke's and you went around the table, maybe it was your first time in there. I remember my first day in that room in St. Luke's, and trying to explain who I was and why I was valuable and why somebody should choose me. That was a train wreck, right? It's a train wreck. It's the hardest thing to do, but it's the most important thing to do, because when you get in this room, again, this room now may look a lot like what we're staring at on the screen right now. It may look like a Zoom meeting with a whole bunch of little rectangles, but when we get in this room, it's over there, Jeff. When we get in that room, we have to tell them something that matters to them. We have to tell them something that they can remember, because the fact of the matter is that after that room, after you've been interviewed, after you've had that conversation, they go off to deliberate. And you don't get to be in that room, They go off to talk about the 3 candidates or the 4 candidates that they interviewed today. If no one remembers you, if no one remembers your message, if you talked about the reprogrammable firmware instead of the 1,000 songs in your pocket, they don't remember. Unless they go, well, that's that person that rambled on and on about firmware and stuff that we don't even understand, right? But this other person, she talked about 1,000 songs in our pocket. Oh my gosh, Joni Mitchell, whatever, right? If we're not memorable, when they go off into that room to deliberate where you don't get to be there, no one's going to advocate for you. And that's what you need. You need someone that's going to carry your flag for you. You got to give them the flag. You have to hand them the flag and say, will you carry this flag into that room and advocate on my behalf? Here's why. I understand you. I'm relevant to the situation. My experiences and my ability to change and evolve and keep up with your changing reality mean that I am relevant and I'm the one that you need to bring in to take care of this problem. They're not advocating for you unless you tell them that. They're not advocating for you unless you give them the flag to carry into that room. That's what's at stake, right? If you start out talking about the firmware, if you start out saying that I'm everything to everybody all the time and all this experience, forget it. It's over. You're like Seinfeld on a really bad night, right? You're like that person that went up on open mic night and had no idea what they were doing. They were just hoping that everybody had drunk enough that they would laugh at anything at that point, right? So give them the flag, be relevant, be memorable. If you do that, you might have the opportunity to turn all of those what's in it for me's into, yeah, this is the guy, this is the girl. This is the person that's actually relevant. This is the person that can actually solve the problem. It's amazing. We didn't even talk about that problem in the job description, but they just told us what they knew was wrong, which was exactly right, and that they know how to solve that problem. They can take care of that pain. They can solve that for us. That's what you've got to be able to do. So what's next? What's next on your agenda? What are you going to do? What do you need to change? I know I probably bent your mind a little bit, but what are you going to do this weekend to take care of these things? That's the question. And that's it. I'm always available. Reach out to me if you have any questions, if you have any feedback. I have the LinkedIn app open on my phone and open on my desktop 24 hours a day. That's probably the best way to reach out to me, but I'm always happy to talk.